Welcome to the Fountains Studio Celebration. Along with this virtual connection, I'd like to encourage you to keep sharing what's happening with you and your loved ones so we can offer one another the kind of support that the Fountains is known for. Just send us your joys and concerns by leaving a voicemail message at the office, by emailing it to welcome@weputlovefirst.org, or you can also go to tinyurl.com/fountainsconnection and fill in the online form. You'll find a link to that below in the description. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for being a part of the Fountains virtual family. We're glad you're joining us for today's celebration.
Join me as we get in the spirit. Spirit of life and love, we gather in the here and now,
creating a circle of love,
ever expanding,
ever growing,
a place of wisdom,
a place of connection,
a place of hope,
a place of compassion.
Let us celebrate the impact of our work together,
an expression of God's grace.
Together, one in time and never apart. We in flesh as brother, sister, makes us one in mind and heart. All incarnate, we would offer all we most sincerely prize. Learning though traditions differ, how they join to make us wise. One in outlook, always searching, not to bind in common creed. As a people, be more ready to respond to others' need. Here we are, so finely fashioned, understanding, here to serve, never narrow in compassion, empathy without reserve. As in Christ may we discover that to give is to receive, that in God the good is present, ever, always we perceive. Not by chance the world's creation, not by chance was life begun. God is love, and our vocation is to love till love has won.
let's affirm the Fountain's mission together.
As followers of Jesus,
We put love first.
As we breathe deep and center ourselves in this moment, may our hearts be open to this reflection, Before You Know It, by Reverend Jim Burklow. Before you know it, your kid's childhood is over. She's gone off to college. Before you know it, your vacation is over, and it's time to go back to work. Before you know it, the storm has passed and the sky is clear. Before you know it, way too much of your life has gone by without you knowing it. So let us know each moment as it happens. Let us savor the goodness of the present and attend to the aches of the moment as well. May our attention catch up to our fleeting thoughts so that we can admire and investigate them. May we listen to those we love, lingering on their words, without our minds racing ahead to respond with our own. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be.
Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God.
As followers of Jesus, we are grateful for a down-to-earth vision of the best of what human life can be. We long to fulfill Jesus' call to life in all its fullness.
When we honor who we are as easily as we are enthralled by what others want us to be, when we stop pursuing happiness and let it embrace us,
When we love not in the hope of getting, but for the joy of giving. When love is not what you can do for me, but what we can be together. When we choose our leaders not for their image, but for their imagination. Not for the politics they play, but for the principles they live.
when our economy thrives on our expressing who we are, not on our spending what we have, when the earth itself is our communion table, when we bite into theology's questions as readily as we swallow technology's answers, when we celebrate today as not just all we have, but as all we need.
For a calling to life in all its fullness, not off in some hereafter, but here and now. We are grateful. This is our prayer.
We offer this time of quiet, bringing our whole selves in the name of the one who taught his first followers to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God.
Hey there, and aloha to everyone who holds a special place for Hawaii in their hearts. It's been heartbreaking to see the wildfires tear through our beautiful islands. We've got our hearts set on Lahaina, a place with deep cultural roots that's only now beginning to deal with the magnitude of their loss. Together, we're aiming to help lift Lahaina up from the ashes and find their strength once again. As United Methodists, we know how powerful it is when we come together as one big family or one big ohana. So we're inviting you to join us in responding generously. Our California Pacific Conference is taking the lead in collecting funds and organizing an on-the-ground response team. 100% of all you give is going to make a huge impact right where it matters, in the hearts and souls of our Hawaiian neighbors and loved ones. It's hard to see a beloved building like the Lahaina United Methodist Church reduced to ashes. But, as Pastor John Crew has written, our biggest concern is making sure our people in Lahaina, on Maui, and all of Hawaii are safe and taken care of, making sure they're wrapped in the love of God and our community. It's tough to find the right words in moments like these, but our spirits are standing strong. As they work through the immediate needs of what comes next, the first responders are asking us to hold off on sending material supplies for right now. But our United Methodist Disaster Response Task Force is actively preparing to assist in any way when we can when the time is right. Remember what Matthew 25:40 says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Your generosity will directly touch the lives of those who have lost loved ones, homes, and livelihoods. If you want to give online, you can give to calpacumc.org/donate. Or, if your heart is telling you to send a good old-fashioned check, make it payable to California Pacific Conference and send it to P.O. Box 6006, Pasadena, California, 91102 6006. Just remember to mark it for the Lahaina Relief Fund. We're filled with gratitude and we're sending out a huge mahalo nui loa, or thank you so much, for standing with the people of Lahaina and all of us who have a special love and connection to Hawaii. Meke aloha, pumihana.
Every day, the Fountain strives to put love first, both in person and online.
And if you are one of our many regular online viewers, we're grateful for your participation as a digital member.
Every week, you hear about all the many ways you can give electronically to support this online outreach, like using the QR code on the screen, going to give.weputlovefirst.org, or downloading the Vanco mobile app. Then, when you're on our secure giving site, be sure to look for the line that says Studio Celebration Donation.
A contribution here lets us know you're out there, that the studio is important to you, and that you want to be a part of supporting this growing digital outreach.
So wherever and whenever you're watching, we're glad you're joining us.
Thanks in advance for supporting the studio financially.
Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because God's given Jesus Christ the Son. And now let the weak say I am strong. Let the poor say I am rich because of what the Lord has done for us. Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because God's given Jesus Christ the Son. Give thanks.
Our passage today comes at a critical juncture in Mark's telling of the Jesus story. Right before our sayings for today, Jesus is on a mountaintop with the disciples, and right before their eyes, he is transformed into a heavenly being who has a chat with apparitions of both Elijah and Moses. Despite this dramatic transfiguration, the disciples are still like, okay, man, but what does it all mean? Then, right after our sayings in today's passage, Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem to face off against the authorities and be killed. So, Jesus is running out of time. Chapter 9 and 10 are his last instructions to his dim-witted followers, which have become today among Jesus' most familiar sayings. Things like, anyone who wants to be first must be last and the servant of all. Next, Jesus takes a child in his arms, and get that blonde-haired, blue-eyed Victorian cherub out of your mind. We're talking a scruffy street waif who survives by begging and stealing, essentially a nuisance to the community. And Jesus says, whoever welcomes one of these little children, essentially the shunned outcast, in my name welcomes me. What? We're supposed to treat this worthless human refuse with dignity? Uh-huh. But just to be clear, he goes on with a threat for non-compliance. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. Then, in this context of instructing the disciples to care for even the vagrant rabble that they'd otherwise ignored, come our collection of "he said what?" sayings. So, as you hear today's passage, imagine Jesus sitting among the disciples with an orphan street urchin on his lap as an audio-visual aid to illustrate his point. Using over-the-top hyperbole, Jesus drives home the consequences of harming the least and the lost in any way.
Our words of wisdom are from Mark chapter 9, verses 43 through 47.
Jesus said, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have 2 hands and go to hell, to the unquenchable fire.
And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown to hell.
Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Thanks be to God.
Once upon a time, a young man wandered into a seaside pub and sat down next to a grizzled old pirate. He immediately knew he was a pirate because the guy had a peg leg, a hook, and an eye patch. Curious, the young man asked, "So, how'd you end up with a peg leg?" "Aye, matey," said the pirate. "We was in a storm at sea and I was swept overboard. Just as me men were pulling me out, a shark bit me leg off." "Wow," said the young man. "What about your hook?" "Well, me bucko," replied the pirate, "we were boarding a merchant ship and one of the defenders lopped me hand off with a sword." "Incredible," said the young man. "And the eye patch?" "Arr, a seagull dropping fell into me eye," replied the pirate. "I beg your pardon?" The young man was incredulous. "You mean to say you lost your eye to a seagull dropping?" "Not exactly," said the pirate. "It was me first day with the hook." Yikes. Truth be told, if any of us were to take today's sayings from Jesus literally, I reckon we'd all end up looking a little bit like our pirate friend, and worse. Cut off your hand? Lop off your foot? Pluck out your eye? Is he serious? Well, he definitely has our attention. Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "The one thing I like about this text is that it defines the limits of biblical literalism. Walk into the most Bible-believing church you can find, where the women don't wear trousers or speak in church, where the men don't swear oaths or mow their lawns on Sunday. Go into a place as strict as that, and I'll bet you won't find many people with eye patches and wrapped stumps, because even the most literal Christians balk at this passage." So, not to be taken literally, but still scary. Comparing Gospels, it's clear that it was scary enough that not everyone wanted to preserve these sayings. Evidently, Mark's telling was too graphic for Matthew, who reduces his version from Mark's 7 verses to just 2 verses, and Luke leaves it out altogether. This imagery is not without precedent, though. There are similar proverbs in the Babylonian Talmud that even add one's ears to the potential list of offending appendages. And then, if you go back to what's called the intertestamental period, that 400 years between the Old and New Testaments, you'll find the dramatic story of the struggle between the Jewish Maccabees and the Hellenistic forces who sought to destroy Judaism. As the tyrant Antiochus IV systematically worked to outlaw Judaism, some Jews complied, others did not. Facing torture and death, an elderly scribe named Eleazar refused to renounce his faith, saying that he didn't want to set a poor example and become a stumbling block for the Jewish youth of his day. Sound familiar? He tells his tormentors, "I will not transgress the sacred oaths of my ancestors concerning the keeping of the law, not even if you gouge out my eyes and burn my entrails." In addition, there's a heroic mother and her 7 sons who, because they refuse to eat pork, are tortured. The first son has his tongue cut out and his hands and feet cut off. His defiant brother tells Antiochus, "Gladly, for the sake of God, we let our bodily members be mutilated." These Maccabean martyrs became national heroes, and their story would have absolutely been known to Jesus' first hearers. So, scholars believe that Jesus may very well have been alluding to this episode in Jewish history, where the heroes of the faith were willing to give up life and limb rather than lapse into apostasy or set a bad example for others. So, in today's passage, it seems like Jesus was suggesting that, as far as he was concerned, his followers should not be any less committed than the Maccabees. And note that this passage is not about the individual's salvation, but about something far more serious. Whether your actions put a stumbling block in the way of someone else. I mean, it clearly says it. It would be better to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around your neck, or cut off a hand or a foot, or pluck out an eye, instead of causing someone else to stumble. The problem with this passage is, in our hyper-individualized, self-centered soup of conventional American Christianity, our passage today gets disconnected from its context and is misrepresented as a warning about maintaining one's personal holiness, when what Jesus is really talking about is how we treat others. And we get this distinction wrong at our peril. Remember, to reinforce how high the stakes are, Jesus uses the extreme hyperbole of cutting off limbs. We already heard a similar example of this kind of hyperbole last week in regard to one's family. Jesus said, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." And to drive his point home, Jesus even employs the threat of burning in hellfire. But let me remind you, just like the amputations of limbs and eyes is not to be taken literally, the threat of a literal hell isn't to be taken literally either. As I've made clear in previous messages, the conventional American idea of hell is completely made up. And anyone who does take hell literally is basically promoting an image of God as the ultimate abuser, who, despite pledges to the contrary, to love everybody forever, stops loving people and takes twisted pleasure in tormenting wrongdoers for all eternity. This is bad on so many levels, including, as my professor Bill Loader has written, when religion embraces such violence in its image of the divine, its adherents will inevitably emulate that kind of violence themselves. And ironically, the hell imagery kind of implodes on itself. While decrying the abuse of little ones, Jesus threatens eternal abuse of the perpetrators as punishment. So much for grace and forgiveness. But back to the amputations. Let's consider this metaphor. The idea of cutting off a limb to save the rest of the body is not new. We do this routinely, fighting cancer, diabetes, and infections. To spare the rest of the body, it's sometimes necessary to cut off or cut out the disease. If only removing sin and shortcomings from our lives was as simple as cutting off a hand or a foot. Unfortunately, our vices and weaknesses are not concentrated in a single extremity. The challenges most of us face pervade our whole being. But we can metaphorically cut off behaviors and tendencies that are not good for us or those around us. Along with being a sought-after musician and teacher, my grandpa Felten was a professional nurseryman, and when I was growing up, he did his very best to pass along some of his green thumb to me. My apprenticeship began with what seemed to me to be my grandfather's overly enthusiastic fixation on weeding. But eventually I worked myself up to overseeing a flourishing garden, one that struck fear into the hearts of my neighbors, as with annual bumper crops I would sneak up to their doorsteps in the dark of night and leave big bags of surplus okra. At any rate, I eventually graduated to tending my own roses, and one thing Grandpa was ruthless about was suckers. Watch out. They may start off looking good, but you need to learn to recognize them early and cut them right off. If you know, you know. Suckers show lots of fast growth and might look good at first, but they never flower. Instead, they just suck the life right out of the whole plant. So yes, in order to be whole spiritually, to not cause others to stumble, we may need to do some pruning. Cut it off. Pluck it out. Just like with weeding, roses, and surgery, selective pruning makes room for wholeness. Pastor Steve Garnass Holmes says, "The teacher is not asking you to maim yourself, but he is inviting you to name what interferes and then take away its power. He's calling us out of the unquenchable fire of our fears, desires, and attachments, and reminds us the pruning is how we become whole." In the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, wounded veterans were dealing with chronic pain and PTSD by drinking themselves into oblivion. In order to deal with the social crisis that this created, there was a surge in the temperance movement across the country. And as part of this movement, the General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church voted that instead of wine, in all cases, the pure juice of the grape be used in the celebration of the Lord's Supper. Well, as it turns out, this was easier said than done. Pure juice of the grape that hadn't fermented was hard to come by. And this meant that communion stewards, instructed to dispose of the consecrated juice after the service by drinking it, were becoming inebriated. About this same time, there was an abstinence-minded dentist in New Jersey who was also the communion steward at his Methodist church. And to solve this problem, the good doctor set himself to developing a pasteurization process for grape juice that would create unfermented sacramental wine for his fellow parishioners. The dentist's name? Dr. Thomas Bramwell Welch. And the process he developed became the foundation of the Welch's grape juice empire. Look, using unfermented grape juice instead of wine for communion seems like a small concession, but for someone struggling with addiction to alcohol, it can make a huge difference because one sip and sobriety's out the window. So guess what? Even institutions can choose to not be a stumbling block to those who are struggling. And that's the whole point of this passage. If we allow ourselves to get distracted by the gory prospect of literally hacking off limbs or of trying to avoid a literal hell, we miss the whole point. Using the vulnerability of a child as an example, Jesus stresses our sacred obligation to protect the weak or the outcast. And yes, Mark has Jesus use some pretty extreme examples to illustrate the conviction that fulfilling that obligation is worth any sacrifice, even some pruning. And if you were wondering, yes, I do think that the disaffiliation of thousands of now formerly United Methodist churches to create a denomination whose primary founding principle is that of excluding people is equivalent to lopping off a diseased limb. The notion that a church can baptize a baby and embrace them as a beloved child of God only to revoke that acceptance when they reach puberty and discover they might not fit into the heterosexual mold is psychological and spiritual abuse. Full stop. We may take some time as a denomination recovering from the surgery, but the United Methodist Church will be healthier in the long run for having lopped off the limbs infected with prejudice and bigotry against our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. So, while your first response to Jesus' amputation talk might be, he said, "What?" I think closer inspection reveals how important caring for all people was to Jesus. He was about building a beloved community, no matter the sacrifice. And yes, there's an element of personal spirituality in this formula. We all have to ask ourselves, what hinders us from entering fully into our best life? But not out of a moralistic duty to keep a bunch of strict rules or else we get punished. It's about embracing the obligation to not be the cause for someone else's stumbling. It's about being intentional, about participating in an interconnected community, and then, with serious self-reflection, wrestling with the very real possibility that we may have to lop off some of the behaviors, attitudes, and traditions that are compromising the full flowering of the least and the last among us. So, here's to cutting off and plucking out whatever is keeping us from living fully into Jesus' vision for a just, inclusive, and compassionate world. Be well.
I need some change. I can't believe it. I need some change. I can feel. I won't give up. I won't give in. I need some change that's real. I need some peace. Don't want the killing. I need some peace that I can feel. I won't give up. I won't give in. I need some peace that's real. I need some power to build my future. I need some power that I can feel. I won't give up. I won't give in. I need some power that's real. I need some hope.
Let us embrace the wonder of this week with expectation and imagination,
with faith to face our challenges,
with love that casts out fear,
with hope to trust tomorrow.
We accept this day as the gift it is,
a reason for rejoicing.
May we go in courage and grace.